you here. I know competition is hard with the talk, so nice to see you here. The topic of my talk is success with Eclipse. Let's start right in. First, a short introduction. My name is Markus Duft. I'm a software architect working for Simon Automation. It's an Austrian-based company. It's part of the SSI Schäfer Group, which is Germany-based. From next year on, we will just the name Simon Automation will disappear. We will be named SSI IT Solutions. So the slight change. We have like 9,000 employees worldwide, 900 in IT, approximately 200 to 300 working on that software that I'm going to talk about today. Together we're working on a software called WAMAS, warehouse shorthand for warehouse management system. That's a standard intralogistics software, and it basically deals with keeping track of stuff in warehouses and moving stuff around in warehouses, being it manually guided or automated. So from purely manually to fully automated, we have everything in there. And this software, it exists for like 30 years now, but is Java and Eclipse based since 2007. So we started over in 2007 and started basically from scratch. Basically, WAMAS deals with everything that happens from the one side of the warehouse to the other one, where on the one side you put stuff in, and on the other side trucks get stuff out. So everything that happens in between, we deal with that. So what is this talk about, and why am I doing this talk? Basically, we have been using and we are using Eclipse very successfully, both as a platform and as an IDE. And we are not exactly small. So there are bigger fish, but we're not exactly small. And we want to share a little bit of our experience and give a little bit back to the community about what we think is really important to do and to consider just to be successful with it. Just a short disclaimer, of course, there are different projects, there are different customers, there are different setups, different software, different everything. So not everything that I'm going to talk about today might match your use cases or scenarios. But still, I hope that there is something useful in there for everyone. First of all, when we prepared for this talk, we were thinking about what are actually the different dimensions of scale that we have in our software and in our environment. First of all, we have the size of the code base. For us, that's right now like 3 million lines of codes in 800 OSGI bundles, 800 Eclipse plugins, with another 1.5 million lines of code that are automatically generated from models. All the bundles are in the workspace simultaneously, so there is no smaller set that everybody is working on. It's just everybody has the whole set of 800 bundles in his workspace, so that's quite tough on Eclipse. There are 150 to 200 developers, so we need to be quite sure that our IDE and environment and platform works, so that not 200 people stand still. If they stand still for an hour, that's like infinite money. We are using more than 15 Eclipse technologies. What does that mean? That means just everything that we use from the open source Eclipse ecosystem. That's wrap, it's Xtext, it's Tabris, it's you name it, we probably have it. We have dozens of nightly and CI builds. So we're developing a product core, and every project does some additional customizations to that product core for each project. So typically, they just copy the product or create a branch from there and have their own fork of the product from there on. So we have quite a lot of nightly builds and CI builds to manage and to set up. So that also is quite demanding to a proper setup technique and strategy. Right now, we have in the meantime, over 14,000 Eclipse installations since we started using these guys' software that tracks that number. And we have approximately 1,200 worldwide customer installations. So that's warehouses where WAMAS is running. And most of them are 24/7, so there is no room for any real mistakes. For every of those installations, we have a range from 50 to 1,000 RCP processes that are running. So we're also doing RCP on the server side. So we're using essentially the same platform for everything. Yeah? We're doing server applications with RCP2, which gives us the launcher and stuff like that that you get for free with RCP. Database sizes, so we're using Oracle, SQL Server, whatever. They're like, you see it. And we have hundreds of attached devices per warehouse. So there are these small mobile devices, there are voice-controlled devices, there are the big devices that are 20 meters high and go really fast through the racks and things like that. So now that we know what kind of dimensions we have that we scale in, where is it important to optimize? Where is it important to work on scalability? And actually, it's clear it doesn't come for free, and we need to optimize everywhere. It's just not good if we have a good platform, but your IDE crashes every 5 minutes. Nobody will like to work on that product. If your IDE is great, but your platform is bullshit, yeah, nobody would like to work on that either. So we identified 3 major areas that we derived from these dimensions of scale that we need to work on and that need to go hand in hand to support the developer. If, for instance, you have a very large code base, then probably you will want to have a good IDE, you will want to have a good platform and a good deployment. If you have a lot of developers and scale in that dimension, probably your deployment is not so important because not every developer will do full deployments at the customer side. But IDE and platform, it's very important, for instance. So in the last few years, we actually did quite some improvements and extensions to our IDE deployment and platform. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I think this is more the scope for today, and it will very likely fill the time. The improvements I'm going to show are not in chronological order that we implemented them, but rather in the order that the developer is going to see these kind of areas in his day-to-day work. So the first thing is IDE and infrastructure. We are centrally managing our Eclipse packages. For this, we're using Genuitech Secure Delivery Center, short SDC. Those guys are out there, sitting here. Come see them, it's a great product. That's Eclipse-based. Unfortunately, it's not free. Just more disclaimer. You can do the same thing with Oomph. The important part here is that you do it. Yeah? You need to think about how to get Eclipse to your developers, how to get it pre-configured, how to get them up to speed quickly. And SDC does allow this, so we define packages for our IDEs. We have quite a few of them already, so there are some. And SDC allows to quickly configure based on, let's say, I want an Eclipse 4.6.1, okay, create a new instance, then I want some additional software. I import the update, the P2 update sites into SDC, and then can just drag and drop my Eclipse package, and that's it. Additionally, I can define preferences that should be set on every workspace. I can define tasks that should run on every empty workspace. So once I start the IDE on an empty workspace, a wizard will pop up, we'll see that later, that allows you to quickly set up a workspace for our development environment. And this has proven a very important point actually for our developers, so that if you have a problem, most of the time, if the workspace simply is in an inconsistent state and people don't know what to do and how to fix an error, the very interesting thing is that most of the time they just throw away the workspace and start again. And because it's so easy to set up, they just don't bother searching for the mistake anymore. Next thing we did was some tight integration with version control and workspace setup. That's going hand in hand with the IDE management. So we have a task that runs on every empty workspace and that knows a little bit about our environment. So it has the URL of our repository pre-configured. You just need to click OK, please clone it for me. And then you have the repository in your workspace. Then we have a small mechanism that allows you to configure working sets and which plugins should go into which working sets. It's pretty simple, not rocket science, but it helps extremely. You choose what do you want to work on, and it will import all the plugins and working sets. Previously, we were using team project sets, and actually it didn't work back then. Yeah? The situation might have improved, but please keep in mind that this technology, or these things that we improved are partially, this is from 2007, I think, or 2008, something like that. But back then, we were sending team project sets via email, which is the best mechanism to distribute team project sets. So whenever somebody introduced a new plugin, there was another email informing everybody that he needs to change his team project set, and it wasn't working very well. So this is now checked into on our branch in the repository, and that's a way better way of working and organizing things. Then we had some troubles with launch configurations. So we were working on a quite large software. We have 800 bundles, and back then when we first introduced this improvement, we had like 500 bundles and 120 something launch configurations that we had. And the problem is, want to ask something? Okay. And the problem is that you don't want to have all the 500 bundles in every launch configuration, so you usually will create a launch configuration with the mode only selected plugins from the workspace, so not every plugin should be in there. But what happens now if you add a plugin? You need to go into every launch configuration and check the plugin where you need it, so that's not very, very comfortable, not if you have 120 of them. Also, another issue that we have had with launch configurations is sometimes you just open the Run Configurations dialog, select the launch configuration, and it will be changed on disk. You didn't do anything in the dialog, but still the file will be changed on disk. That's some issue with the XML format. It's a known issue, but unfortunately nobody fixes it. Me neither, so I should not moan. What we did with the launch configuration improvement, we have a small view that lists all the available launch configurations that we have, and these launch configurations can be launched, debugged, or simply generated from this view, and are defined in a very tiny file format. It's just some custom file format. It's a property file, actually, that is stable. So what you do here is that you just define the top-level plugin that should be in there, and basically it generates a real Eclipse launch configuration, and for you presses the add required button. So it puts in all the dependencies that you need to run this launch configuration. This is very likely to become open source, so we're working on that right now. It will change a little bit because I'm not very happy with the syntax. I'm not very happy with the UI, but we will discuss and see what we can improve there. Right now, we're working with the foundation to get the proposals somewhere. So once this is in the community review process, it's just as normal. They will be announced as new projects available for review. If you want to be informed, then get my card afterwards. That's not a problem at all. Actually, the biggest area that we were working on the past few years was something called WAMA's Power Build. So we had a bit of an issue a few years ago with nightly builds that were never working. So we had our software that was in Subversion. We had nightly builds that were building using ANT. And they required a lot of separate configuration. You have ANT files, you have configuration files. You need to define features and version numbers and what to bundle together and how to run tests and whatnot. So there was really a lot of extra duplicate configuration that was not used in the Eclipse IDE, but was only used in headless builds. So what the primary goal of this was to be able to run the same thing as is running in the workspace headlessly in our nightly builds. So what we actually wanted to achieve with that is that we have one command that we start, and it does exactly what the developer would do in his daily work. Check out the repository, import the projects, and run the Eclipse compiler on every project. Run our generators that we have, and so on and so forth. So this was one of the problems we wanted to solve with that. Second problem was that our build inside the workspace was already quite slow. So we had the 500 to 800 bundles, and the build was getting slower and slower, and we were searching for a reason why. Nowadays, most of the issues are solved already, but back then, package import calculation was extremely slow. So we discovered that Eclipse was spending a lot of time during the auto build of a project trying to figure out how to wire those projects with package imports, even though we were not using a single package import. So that's another thing that we, for us, discovered that package import is not suitable for us. Package import would be something that I would want to use in a framework. So if I have no idea, I program some library and I have no idea what's the final environment that it will be running in. But if I really actually develop an application where I have exactly defined environment, then it's much easier on the developers, on any static architecture checks, on whatever, on the build, on everything, yeah? If you use require bundle. So you have hard dependencies, but that's easier to manage. Yes, our Vamos Power Build was the solution to that. So we introduced a small headless application and the possibility to run this headless application also from the IDE. So you can do whatever you can do with Vamos Power Build from the command line, you can also do it from the IDE and vice versa. So it's a very simple system that just allows you to define tasks and task chains and run these task chains which executes all the tasks. And one of the tasks back then was building the workspace, building everything. And this helped us a lot because previously we had no orchestration tool on top of the workspace build. So Eclipse builds one project after the other and that's it. Yeah? It tries to figure out the order and be done. If you have some kind of orchestration, you could also, what we do, have generators that are actually written based on the application platform. So we have applications in our workspace that are actually code generators for the rest of the application. So what we need to do is compile the platform and the generator first, generate some source code, run this generator in the final target environment, and then continue compiling. So with Vamos Power Build, this is very easily possible just by defining that there are some external dependencies that are not known to Eclipse. Yeah? You need to run a generator, and the generator is a dependency on the bundle that defines the generator. So the build will first compile everything, run the generator, then continue. And this is happening actually 3 to 4 times during our build, that some external generator is kicked in. So this is basically everything you can see from Vamos Power Build. It's just a menu in the IDE or a headless application, which you tell which task chain to execute. And then it will just output, hey, I'm done. And with this thing, we were actually able to reduce the build time, the median build time for a single developer from over 1 hour to 5 minutes. So this was just, it's not only the Eclipse compiler, it's just the manual intervention that was required just to run the generators. That's pretty clear. But also the package import stuff, it helped really a lot to get rid of that because Vamos Power Build uses only the require bundle information, even though it could use package import too. So historically, we were using a lot of model-based development. So we had a lot of UML models, but we had some problems with these UML models. Actually, the models themselves were pretty okay, but the technology was pretty bullshit. We were using XML zip files to store these models, and they are binary. Even using XMI directly would not have solved our problems. They were stored in an external repository. Once we migrated to Git and Gerrit, this became a real pain point because when do you commit the external repository? Is it the moment you push to Gerrit, but then it's too early on the external repository because you're still in review on Gerrit? Do you commit once the review on Gerrit is done and you submit? No, that's way too late because you block everybody else. And that's the other point. This external repository used pessimistic locking to lock the models. So only one person was capable of changing it at the time. And then the commit point in time was always wrong, always. Of course, there was no merging. We were stuck for technical reasons on UML1. And actually, we have very rich models with a lot of meta information. And all this meta information was stored in tagged values. And tagged values have a downside. They're absolutely not type safe. So nobody checks anything. You can have a typo in the key. You can have a typo in the value. Your value can be of a wrong type, everything. So you're pretty much lost with that technology. So we replaced everything with Xtext-based DSLs. And this was a huge leap. So really, everybody was happy with that decision. The only concern that was raised before we did the switch was, ooh, where are the nice images going? So from the UML models, it's pretty easy. You export a PNG and have documentation of the model. So they wanted us to implement something as a replacement for that. And we actually did that. So we have a DSL to define our models. This, for instance, is for our database model. And in this DSL, we have a very tiny part that deals with diagrams. And it allows just to define a diagram with relative positioning. So no absolute positioning. Nobody should deal with a pixel-perfect diagram. It's just you can influence it in that you just say, this node should be here, and this node should be right off that node. So with Xtext, that's pretty easy to achieve. And even the creation of this model view, it took like 1 week or something to get all the layout algorithms and stuff right. So this was for all the developers a huge improvement to get rid of these pessimistic locking and synchronization issues and organizational chaos. So much for the IDE. Now a little bit about WAMAS, the platform and product core. We're going with the Eclipse releases since 2007, so we've historically always sticked pretty close to the Eclipse releases. Only some exceptions, Eclipse 4. It was a bit painful, so we were not able to upgrade our target platform in time before we made a huge WAMAS release. So we were forced to actually stick with 3.8 for that huge release. But still, we wanted to use the new IDE for developers because it has had a few good features. So that's actually the point where we split out the target platform. Before that, in the dark Middle Ages, we were not even using a target platform. So we were developing against running platform. And actually, we were forced to split because of E4. And looking back, this was the best decision ever, of course. Whoever you ask who knows about target platforms, he will tell you, you need to use it. It's just not possible to work without the target platform. And yes, that's true. So if you get the chance, create the target platform. It has been a bit painful to maintain these target platforms, but since 1 year or 2 or something, the target platform DSL and generator by Obeo is here. And this is really an extremely good tool. I talked to the Obeo guys on Eclipse Conference and stuff, so that's really a nice tool. We're using that for all our targets. What did we do in the application? What were big steps for us to improve it for everyone? The platform, we introduced rep support that was actually pretty straightforward. So it was surprisingly straightforward to put rep support in there. Just a few singletons and things like that we needed to clean up, but nothing really dramatic. And that gave us 800 SWT-based dialogues in the web for free. We did not touch a single dialogue, not a single one. Yes?
I have a question regarding rep. You said you use bundle dependencies and not import package.
Yes.
Isn't that a problem for a single sourcing application, so using rep and SWT
Not really, because we're using a little trick, and that's so we have a UI framework, and the UI framework has an optional dependency to SWT and an optional dependency to rep. So depending on in which workspace or against which target platform you're building, either the one or the other is satisfied. Okay. So
Another way would have been package import.
Package import, yes, of course, yes. That would have allowed to only specify a single dependency and not 2 optional ones, but it has some other downsides, so we didn't do it. So that's our application in the web. It looks exactly the same as on the desktop. Everything works the same as on the desktop, so we're happy with that. Next big leap was ECF support instead of RMI. So we're classically using RMI, but RMI is not very OSGI friendly, so we were not even able to start the registry in an OSGI process in a way that we could work with it. So it is somehow possible, but not everything that we were using. Also, it prevented us from scaling because the RMI registry allows to register services only from the local machine. So you start an RMI registry, and only the same machine is allowed to register services on there. So you either find a multi-tiered RMI registry approach where you have a registry that knows other registries, that know the real services on the machines, but that's not very practical. So we decided to throw it away altogether and replace it with ECF. And that was actually really a good decision. It was not super simple to replace it, but it was in the end the right decision. It was like 2 weeks work for an application with 5 million lines of code. That's not too long, right? And it helped us a lot. There is no remote interface you need to implement. There are no remote exceptions that you need to handle. Connection recovery is transparent, so you don't need to care about reconnects or anything like that. And it's way less effort for developers. Deployment of our application, that's now the last part. We're again using the Genuitech Secure Delivery Center. We have been working together with Genuitech to really adapt SDC to our needs. And SDC is already, you heard that before, dealing with provisioning Eclipse applications to the target machine. So they're building installers, they're building the package configurations, running tasks and stuff like that. So we thought that might be a good fit for our application because after all, we're an RCP application, the same as Eclipse. So we reused everything that was in SDC, all the technology to provision our processes, and are building our server processes on the SDC server. We have some UI to control, configure, monitor, start, stop our server processes that we integrated with the SDC with its own UI. And also SDC is building install wizards for our desktop client and stuff like that. So that's really a very easy experience for the developer. They really need to press one button in the IDE, please build me a pack. It will transfer our whole software to SDC. SDC does some magic. And in the end, all our server processes are there. You just need to start them. And the desktop client, you just downloaded it, and you have an install wizard with next, next, next install. So that's a pretty good thing. It helps a lot for project teams to assure consistent and quick deployments. We also have a hotfix wizard that allows to only transfer 1 to 10 whatever bundles, how much ever you changed, yeah, from your workspace directly to any running instance and get a clean and really consistent provisioned process structure on the server. We also have some IDE extensions into SDC, so it's possible from our IDE to connect to any SDC server, choose an instance, control all the processes, start, stop them, attach a remote debugger directly. It even knows where to get the source from. You can overrule this, of course, and so on. So how does this look like? Our application deployment looks something like this. This is again SDC, but this time with our custom UI. It's very hard to see anything, right? Okay, whatever. There are a lot of configuration properties on top where you can change values and stuff, and the process list on the bottom where you can simply start, stop, monitor, and do everything you want to do with your server processes. And this is essentially the same thing from the IDE. So there is a view, you connect to a server, choose an instance, you get the list of processes. You can do the very same thing directly from the IDE. So the developer has actually very, very low effort to get to control, update, configure whatever, any server instance that is running at the customer side. So they can connect to anyone in the world.
How is this documented?
Sorry?
How is this documented that if something happens, you know what was running and who has changed which bundle last time?
Normal logging. Just normal logging. So SDC has a user system, authentication system. You define users and their tokens, and whenever you connect to a SDC server, you need to provide your token, then it knows which user you are, and so on. So then you have proper logging and everything.
So logging on the production machine?
On the server, yes. So our conclusion, and this is nearly the end, is that it proved for us very important to have people care. People need to care about how to get people up to speed, how to get developers to get to their workspace until they can really start working. It's important to have people to care about the application platform and how to make it usable for the developers so that they can work in the proper way and scale the application. And it's also important to care about deployment, because that's in the end, if you're on site and need to make a code change and then just need to copy jar files somewhere and you get confused and then everything is breaking. So having consistent ways of doing all this is very, very important for us. So in the end, our conclusion is that Eclipse can scale. We can scale with Eclipse. We're very, very happy with it and how it develops actually. And still, yet there is no one-fits-all recipe for scaling. So whatever you heard today, this was what we did and what we find very important for scaling. Maybe it's completely different one corner ahead. So I think we have actually no time for questions. However, you can find me here, outside, wherever. And thank you for listening.